You're live.
Hi, welcome to another fast forward Zoom thing. We need to come up with a name for these. I'm Mike Zipser with Fast Forward, and with me today are the team that created The Underfoot, a wonderful graphic novel about intelligent hamsters and other things in a post apocalyptic DC. And with me are the co writers, Emily Whitten and Ben Fisher, and the artist, Michelle Nguyen. Welcome, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Hello.
Thanks.
It's great to see you. Emily, I've known for a while. Ben and Michelle, I just met. Uh, and they're really nice, I'll tell you that.
Oh, give us time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Underfoot. And what interests me, particularly as a comics fan, is the collaborative nature of creating comics. Even more in this case, because there's co-writers and artists, and you guys all have to work together. How do you do that? What's the process for creating this comic?
Ben, do you want to give it a shot and then I'll jump in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know how much you want to deep dive into the real mechanics of it, but a lot of it is once we've sort of come up with the storyline, it's a lot of script writing back, and we sort of bounce the ideas back and forth on those pages. Emily and I do until we feel like we've got it pretty locked down. That can obviously sometimes can take a while. But once we sort of feel like we've got that script part locked down, then we send it over to Michelle. She gives she'll often have her own ideas based on that, and we sort of go from there, which sounds very simple, but in practice it winds up being a whole bunch of emails and phone calls, and we're on different time zones, so it can be all hours of the day back and forth to kind of get it fleshed out. And Michelle and I had worked together before, but the three of us as a group had never worked together before. And it was my first time with a kind of a co-writing concept like this before. So we all sort of had to learn how to make this work kind of on the fly a little bit. So the first few months, I feel like we're kind of just growing pains of figuring out how to get the process moving. But we moved along a pretty good clip after those first couple months, I feel like.
Yeah, it's funny because we're working on book 2 right now, and we're at the stage where Michelle's doing the art. So the writing in large part is cemented by now. So it's interesting to try to look back to what was the beginning like, because Ben and I talked to each other for like legitimately 6 or 7 years about all of the ideas before we wrote it. And then the first one, we had to figure out a lot, like Ben was saying. So the first chapter had something like 25 drafts. And then by the second chapter of book 1, it was like 15 drafts, and then it was like 10 for for chapter 3, and then maybe like 8 for chapter 4. And so we've gotten our pattern and rhythm down more. And then of course so I've written in journalism, nonfiction, fiction, legal, but I had not written a full comic before. So I'm very glad that I have Ben as my co-writer, because he has the format and the beats, in a way that I have had to pick up and learn about, just like you learn any form of writing. And then, of course, Michelle as the artist, I had only worked with an artist on doing like 9-panel webcomics. So it's very different. This is a very complex world. It has certain science or nature things that we want specific versus other ones that Michelle can go crazy on. So, making sure that we tell her when there's something that needs to be XYZ before she draws 3 versions of it is important. And of course, schedules are very difficult to figure out at first, because we all have other jobs and we all have different time zones, and everything is very like, I need this by then so that the next step can be a thing. And it goes through everything from our writing to the various phases of art to the lettering and all of the editing. So it's a lot, but I think that we've got a pretty smooth process now by book 2, by the 2/3 of the way through book 2 creation, or whatever you want to call it. And it's a great process. I'm very fortunate to have this team as my first team to work with on something like this, because I think we work super well together and have been able to hammer out any little quirks without egos or crazy upsetness, which is good, because a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
You hear about teams that just explode over stuff, and that doesn't sound fun.
That's always good. Oh, by the way, just Neil Ottenstein says hi. He's on
Hi, Neil.
listening.
Thanks for
Kathy just
stopping by.
yeah. Um, so Michelle, when you get brought in for the arc, because you not only have to create the characters, but you have to know how to have them be the different breeds of hamster.
Yes, and thank goodness for Emily because she is our resident hamster expert. So it's, well, this one's going to be a teddy bear Syrian and this one's going to be a Chinese dwarf. And I'm like, I got to Google that because I don't actually know. But Emily's really good about sending references. Like, I want this hamster to have, brindle coloring. Here's a hamster that has that coloring of that breed. So it makes it really easy, but it is hard because we do have such a diverse cast of characters that, you have to make sure that when there are 10 hamsters on the page, you can tell who's who.
Yeah. Oh, do one of you want to give a quick little elevator thing on what on the Underfoot is, what it's about?
Who wants to go? I'll start, then anybody can pitch in.
Go for it.
So the Underfoot as a series is a post-apocalyptic story that has so far taken place in the DC area, which is where I hail from. And it is about these intelligent hamsters who have special abilities that were given to them by humans, possibly for good reasons. We are learning more about that. And they use their skills to survive and to, some of them like trade favors with other animals to make sure that they have what they need to live in the world they're in. And then on top of that, they use a lot of human science that they've found or inherited from where they were developed to create unique aspects of where they live and what they do. So the first book is about the hamster aquatic mercenaries, and they have special abilities in swimming and diving and different structures of their anatomy, physiology. And then eventually you learn that there are more groups of hamsters and other animals with special abilities. And so by book 2, we have met so the first group are the ham, and the second group are the HAP, the hamster airborne paratroopers. And these hamsters, they live in trees as opposed to the ham who live in burrows and under the water. So there's a lot of different science going on, a lot of different ways that they choose to explore and exist in their world. That's not an elevator pitch. I was way too long. Ben, you have anything to add?
It's an escalator pitch.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add to that is Emily buried the lead a little bit. There are no humans left on Earth, and nobody knows why. So that's sort of a mystery that everybody's a little bit wondering about.
The giants that were.
Yeah.
They were. We don't know. They're gone. They were. And
they may come back because they left the instructions about when they might come back in the
right.
I'd love theoretically.
Yeah.
The return. They have a return
right.
paper,
a return
policy
yeah.
that they found which is hysterical.
Well, I will say one thing I enjoy about writing.
Whoop.
Uh-oh.
She froze. She'll get back.
Do we do a song and dance until she comes back?
Well, actually, I'll ask Michelle a question.
Oh, sure.
Co-writing the series and co-creating the series is there are still a lot of questions.
Yeah, you're back.
You froze for a minute.
Am I here? Oh,
and
sorry,
I was
guys.
just
my internet connection is unstable.
As are many of us.
Yeah.
Yes, I just got a message. But assuming I'm back now,
you're back.
I was just going to say you don't want too many unanswered questions at a time. But one of the things that Ben and I worked on developing was a world where we know a lot about what happened, but the reader learns it much more slowly. So it's not a one book series. It's not a one book answer. It's a series answer where each book has its own story, but over time you're learning more about the grand story. And that's something I enjoy as a reader.
Yeah.
To learn more about things and maybe go back and say, oh, now I understand in book 1 why this was happening, because in book 2 or 3, ta-da,
And you can see the world building in the first one, because you have little bits of scientific papers and other documents, and it let me know that, oh, these guys have this all worked out. They know exactly what was done. They know what happened. They know, it's world building. That's a thing I love. I was going to ask Michelle, the beginning of the comic and in a few places later on, there are pretty long action sequences with no dialogue. How did you work that out? Did you, Emily, and Ben talk about what was happening? Did they give you a script and you drew from it? Because that's fascinating to me, how that piece works out.
Yeah. So basically, like Emily was saying, Ben and Emily will take a script and go back and forth and really flesh it out. And I'm really grateful that it's written so thoroughly, because I've worked with writers before where it's like, the weasel and the hamster fought. And you're like, great. I have no idea what that looks like, because I promise if you go to YouTube and search for weasels fighting hamsters, you will find 0 results probably.
Probably not something I want to Google, because God knows what'll show up.
It won't end well. So thankfully the scenes are written out really detailed. So anything from, the Hap sword getting stuck on the side of the weasel to, the direction that a character is flung, because that leads to what happens later on in that scene. Everything is pretty fleshed out. And the way that I do it is I usually do thumbnails, which are kind of readable sometimes. Think of it as stick hamsters. And then slowly build that up through pencils and inks. And it's really just finding a camera angle that will work, that shows all the details that Ben and Emily want to include, but also show a sense of movement, which is something that is incredibly important in comics, and something I want to keep working on, because I see artists that can translate movement onto one frame, and I'm like, wow, it's impressive every time.
You did a pretty damn good job on it.
Oh, thank you.
Particularly the weasel fight.
That was fun.
The blood splatter, and
mm-hmm.
that was a
yeah. And she's being a little overly modest. She's very good at taking those script pages a lot of times and saying, I see that you've got 4 panels here, but really this should be 6 panels, and here's why. And it's inevitably significantly better than anything that we put in front of her. So she's very vocal about when she needs to fix a script for us.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of her personal comics, you can see that she's got the writing chops too.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
So that she's got to be able to bring that into it. I mean, Tea and Biscuits.
Oh.
I thought that was lovely. You had the what in church that seemed to be very personal.
Yeah, they're both very personal. The what one was just about the franticness that is my dad's side of the family when they all get together for my dad's wedding too. Mom number 4 is what he calls her. So, but that's a whole nother story that we do not need to get into right now.
Because
thank you. I wanted to add really quickly one thing Michelle does really well, which I think as I do a little drawing and things here and there, but I'm not a comics artist in that sense. We are writing an entire world from the point of view of creatures that are like this big. And Michelle has to draw as if we're looking at it through their eyes for the most part. Sometimes you see things from above, but it's a lot of what do the hamsters see and how are they interacting with the world? So scenes that you might not even think about where they're walking through tall grass and some of the grass is over the hamsters because they're really small. She has to think about all of that and then make it visual for everyone to have that perspective. And I think that's hard, and she does it very well.
Yeah.
I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
really
and as writers, we a lot of times we wind up getting the credit for a really great scene or great visual, and the truth is on the page it was pretty black and white in a literal sense. And what you're really enjoying about that panel is stuff that Michelle did, and I've said before multiple times on these kind of panels when we worked on the Grumpy Cat comics together, I bet if you were to find the 10 best jokes in there, 7 of them are visual gags that Michelle came up with all on her own, but I would get credit for it, as the writer of the comic, but it was all Michelle coming up with fun ideas in the background.
Cool. We have a question from our audience, from Neil. He wonders, how many books do you envision, or perhaps how many for just the first main arc?
Ben, why don't you start?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, and it's not a perfect world in a whole lot of ways, The plan is hopefully we'll have 3 books as the initial arc that'll tell the main storyline beginning to end, and we've got, of course, ideas that can extend far from there. But the goal hopefully is to get 3 books. We've written each book to be self-contained, so there's not going to be a scenario where you get a book and then if another one doesn't come out, you're stuck forever. Each one of them ends in a way that the storyline ends for you. But our plan for the first arc at least is 3 books. Yeah.
And my plan is to keep writing hamster books until the literal cows come home into the book and it's all about them, which won't happen for many books. But essentially, Ben, as we said, Ben and I have, this first arc of 3 planned out, and, obviously it will develop more as we get through book 2 and through book 3. But we have the fairly concrete idea for somewhere between, like 8 to 10 stories that we can continue to tell if there's an opportunity to do so. So 3, but 10. But more, and then Netflix is going to make it into an animated series because obviously each book is its own season, and it all goes together. And I have world domination plans in terms of hamster underfoot story stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And then there'll be the undercons.
Right.
Yes, we will organize
up.
Undercon, which will not be confused with WonderCon. So.
And you'll make me work on it.
Yes, I will.
Because I have worked for and with Emily on conventions.
Yes, we both work on running fan conventions and genre fiction conventions, and it's really fun.
Yeah. So let me say one thing. Thank you so much for not making the cat the bad guy.
I don't think we would be forgiven.
That was Ben, because I'm allergic to cats. So, no, I mean, I like cats, but I can't actually be around them. But Ben has a little kitty who's really cute, so.
We do too. It hasn't shown up here yet, but it might. Yeah, because usually that was the end of a chapter and the cat shows up and it's like, oh, it's going to be the mean kitty. And no, it's the nice kitty. I like that.
And that visual of the hamsters riding on the cat's head is maybe my favorite visual in the book. I'm not sure I can narrow it down to just one. It would be almost impossible to do, but that'd be a contender anyway.
And he didn't
want
want him to.
Fist in the air, so.
Yes! So happy to ride on the cat. I can't pick favorites, but I do love that one.
Yeah, so do you guys have favorite characters? I mean, Michelle, do you have a favorite character to draw? Ben and Emily, do you have characters that mean a little more to you?
Somebody else go first and then I'll come in.
Oh gosh. I really like drawing Rem, who's the explosives expert. And that's actually my favorite panel in the book.
Me too. Well, it's my favorite panel of Rem in this book, and it's one of my favorite overall panels generally.
Yeah, so she's just, she's got scars and she's beat up from, exploding things constantly, but she's so peppy and positive, and I think that that's a really good way of looking at life. Like, you can have scars, but you don't have to be a scarred person. So I love drawing Rem. And in case anyone's wondering, I always have to look at her reference page that I made because I don't remember where any of her scars go.
Who would?
Yeah, Rem's a great character. Really is.
And do you have one?
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, it'd be my favorite. To say my favorite, probably be a little bit of a spoiler. So I'll skip over and say what has become my favorite through the course of the first book and then deep into the second is Buddy and sort of Buddy Terry as a combo in particular. But Buddy's coming to her own in a way that I wasn't really expecting when that I've fallen in love with Buddy a little bit for sure.
Cool.
So I love all the little hamsters, but
of course you do.
Whitten, even though we don't get to see him all the time, he's one of the hamsters who trains the little pups, and he's like training them to swim better in the first book because he's part of the ham. And he's a Chinese dwarf hamster who's very old and has some scars as well. I don't know if we can see very well. There he is.
There he is. Yeah.
And of the 4 hamsters I've owned, 3 of them have been Chinese dwarf hamsters, and they are a wonderful little breed. I love them dearly. And Whitten was one of the first, a Chinese dwarf hamster who was old and scarred and had been through a lot and was now a trainer, was one of the first ones that I really imagined as being part of the group. And he had a different name. He went through a couple of names, but Whitten is also named for Wynton Marsalis, who is a famous trumpet player, and my sister is a concert level trumpet player and a music teacher. And so I like that I used to listen to a lot of Wynton Marsalis that she would play, as well as her practicing. So I like that we have one named after Wynton Marsalis.
And I'll say, just sort of anecdotally, although I will completely avoid spoilers in every way here. I did something that I never do in the second. I did it in the second book. I wrote a death scene, and then had realized that I'd fallen so in love with the character that I had to close the laptop and kind of walk away and slept on it. And the next morning, rewrote it to let that character live. I never do that, but I just I couldn't bring myself to do it. So that's the only time I've ever rewritten myself. I've rewritten myself for lots of other reasons, but that was the first time I've done that.
There is one character that we developed, and I said, Ben, we're never allowed to kill this character. Although, never say never, but I did early on, I said, we're not allowed to kill this one. So we'll see.
I have to think about that.
I mean, now I feel like that about all of them, but this was early on, when we only had a few. So.
Yeah. I mentioned the scientific papers and the other little things that were in between the chapters, I really liked the idea of doing those, because it really gave you a feeling of the world and who the characters, getting a little deeper into the characters. Whose idea was that? Where did that come from?
The science pages?
The science pages, yeah.
Gosh, I don't know whose idea. I mean, it sounds like an Emily idea, but I don't know.
Maybe I hate to say anything was one person's idea. I think maybe it started with me because I love books like fantasy books with maps in the front. And the other thing that both Ben and I really feel is to show, not tell. I don't like exposition heavy stories, and Ben doesn't either. So this is, so the map, it sets the scene. That probably came straight from my brain because I just really love that in books that you read, like sci-fi especially, or fantasy especially. But then the character stuff and the science stuff, wherever it started, we both, then developed it and worked on it. But what it allows us to do, especially for a kid's book, like I remember reading a book as a kid and being like, oh, here's the part where in the story they explain the dictionary definition of this word. Boo. I caught that. I don't like it. It takes me out of the story. So this allows us to give background without everything coming out of a little hamster's mouth or a little character's mouth. And the science stuff I get really nerdy about. I'm not a scientist in the, like accredited sense, and I hopefully am getting it right, but I love weird science and weird nature science. So we have things in the books that come from just, I lived in Yellowstone National Park for 3 months at one point. So like things that I've seen or things that I've read about and been to, we will send each other links to weird science articles and be like, this has to be in the next book. And Ben found one recently that I will not talk about because it'll be in a book, but I didn't know about it. And we had written in something that allows us to perfectly build it in if we want to into a later, into the third book. So I think the idea might have started wherever, but the whole encapsulation of it is something to allow us to tell all of our readers, but especially kids who are extremely like, oh, I know I was like that. No, don't put your teaching in my book. It allows us to still teach some things or put that stuff in there.
Speaking of the map, I went to Google Maps because as a DC guy, I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's got to be that. It's got to be Roosevelt Island, and that's got to be, and just to compare it, just to look and make sure, it's like, yep. There it
Yeah,
is.
I'm very precise about that. It is in fact true that if you were to use Google Maps to measure the spaces between this point and this point, and then you were to figure out how hamsters measure distance, they are as accurate as Google Maps and we could make them.
They
So
measure it in wheelies.
theoretically, assuming our calculations were correct, there's always room for error. The hamsters are going at a rate that is measurable in human measurement if you translate their language of slang of what they talk about with the wheelies and everything like that. It should work.
How long is a wheelie?
Well, should I spoil it, guys? Should I spoil
Oh,
it?
is that something that comes up later?
It's not. No. I'll share with the group. The book's been out for a little over a year. So there is a standard hamster wheel that if you were to roll it one entire time would be approximately a yard. So
okay.
a wheelie.
I thought it had something to do with that.
Yeah, a wheelie is in fact one standard lab size, theoretically, hamster wheel that I think is about the 12-inch diameter one. I would have to look up, but we did look it all up. It's in our notes. And then if you took it and you rolled it one time, that would be the yard. And so each wheelie is a yard.
Okay. Neil is asking, is there or will there be any valiant guinea pigs? And I can tell him, yes, there are. There are very valiant guinea pigs.
We have all kinds of animals. You will see more different breeds. You will see more totally different kinds of animals that aren't rodents at all,
yes.
as are the first book and the second book. So, there are valiant everything and also non-valiant characters too.
There is feather, fur, and scale.
Yeah.
So, and there was Gunther. God, I loved Gunther.
Yeah,
love Gunther too.
Yeah.
With his little DC mug.
And that was the thing. A lot of the little DC references in there that you guys wrote and that Michelle drew in there were nice little Easter eggs for DC people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna set something around the area, then you should try to work it in whenever it makes sense. Is what we think.
Michelle, what was it like working with two attorneys? Because these guys are both day jobs as attorneys.
Yes. And it's funny because whenever I bring that up, when I say, oh, I'm working with two writers, they are both in law. It's really interesting, but it's good because they know how to do research and they know how to talk so succinctly, both of them. So it's nice to have super detail oriented scripts and stories and backup material. So you can definitely tell that they're both incredibly smart. It's amazing. And it's really nice to have that backing up all the science because I'm not a science guy. Like I read it and I'm like, I believe it. Sure.
You just trust them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's probably okay.
It's probably fine.
Yeah.
So
yeah. How did you guys find each other? I mean, Ben, you'd worked with Michelle before, and Ben and Emily, how did you all find each other to get together to do this project together?
Emily, you want to tell the story how we met?
I will. So my first little dwarf hamster, whose name was Isabel Stowe Hamsterlet, shout out to Discworld fans who recognize Isabel Stowe Hewlett as the reference. She was known to myself as Bitty Miss Izzy because they're really small. They're like this big, tiny little hamsters. And I started a Twitter account for Bitty Miss Izzy. And while I was like on my lunch break at work, I would tweet like what she was doing while I was away. Like, oh, she's eaten all the peanut butter. The heffalumps have come and they're having a party on the bed. What should she do? And so some people, for a long time, my Twitter handle was Miss M, and that's because that's what the hamster would say to me when she was distressed and wanted me to come home, theoretically. So anyway, I was doing this silly, ridiculous tweeting of hamster things. And then I was also reviewing comics for Comic Mix, comicmix.com, and doing other journalism for them. And Ben wrote a comic called Splitsville, which was a 3-issue miniseries. It was very funny. It was very clever. And the concept was there's one hero in this world and he's also the villain, but the only people who know that are his sidekicks who are making money off of sharing him as the hero and the villain of the world, like exploiting him. And I thought it was so clever. So I did a review, I tweeted it at Ben, and he found my hamster account and started tweeting at me as another hamster. And then like sometime after that, we were like, we should really write a story about this. And then we talked about it in various forms for about 6 or so years before we pitched it. So that's how we started working together.
I think it's pretty common. I feel like that's probably how most collaborations start.
Yeah, most writing teams, I think, did it writing as pets to each other. Yeah, it's a standard. It's actually kind of a cliche, if I have to say.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then how did you guys find Michelle? I mean, Ben, where did you run into her?
Well, Michelle and I got lucky when I was writing for Dynamite, when they hired me to write the Grumpy Cat comics. They just paired me with artists, or they paired the artist with me, however you want to look at it, I guess. And so I worked with a few different artists in that book. And the stories that I was lucky enough to do with Michelle she was just so good at them. And like I said, every panel she was making funnier than I had written it, which is exactly what you want from a comedy book. And so I was really hoping to get to work with her again at some point. And when started putting this pitch together, and of course it was very animal centric, and that's what I had worked with Michelle on anyway. I kind of went to her hat in hand and asked if she'd be willing to work with me one more time. I was lucky enough that she said yes. So.
Yeah, and it's really funny because when we were at the point where we were starting to look at, who would be an artist, I asked several like friends, who do you think I should look at for this or that? Who do you think we should consider? And then I had a couple people in mind, but like, there wasn't anybody who, people recommended people whose art was really great, but it wasn't what I was imagining. So I didn't follow up on it. And I kind of kept hemming and hawing about it for, I don't know how long, probably at least several weeks. And then Ben showed up and was like, I think I know who we could get for this. And Michelle did a pitch art of a really like realistic hamster, a really cutesy hamster, and a kind of middle of the road cutesy, but also realistic hamster. And I was like, that's what we need, because it needed to be a little bit cute, because I love cute and we want cute, but it also needed to be some a kind of art that you could take seriously, so it could have humor, but also really serious stuff going on, because we have post-apocalyptic world, we have fights with people, with other animals, we have all kinds of serious things happening. So it needed to be believably like not just cutesy, but we also wanted, some fun and some cute. So Michelle's art was really great for that, and especially that like balance she struck there. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, cute hamster. Like you were talking about the scars, they look like real scars.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You can see where they came from. And the fights, these are not cute little cartoony fights. These are nasty, bloody.
Yeah, I was actually
That's Ben's fault.
convinced. I was fairly convinced we were not going to get through the first round of editorial because of how bloody those fights were. And I really wanted it to be bloody, but I already had my back against the wall ready for a fight, and we got very lucky. Lion Forge gave it the thumbs up from the get-go. So.
Well, I have to say, a couple of Ben's things that he's written before this were horror anthology and or storyline things.
Ladybird.
So, yeah.
Ladybird is so damn creepy.
Yeah. So there was this background where Ben had that, and of course I just love cute things. But the very first webcomic I ever wrote got pinged by editorial over at what was Reel's channel at the time, because they weren't sure that you could show Deadpool shooting Green Lantern in the head. But it was tastefully blood splat,
It's
so
Deadpool.
I've had some whatever kind of questions about whether editorial would be okay with it. But Ben's previous history in such writings is probably why you get the epic fight. Like, I love the fight scenes, but that's definitely more his forte than mine, I would say.
But what kind of feedback did you guys get from Lion Forge when you pitched it and as you went through the process? Because that's another piece of collaboration in this is the publisher.
Absolutely. Ben, do you want to start and I'll pitch in?
Yeah, I've been pretty lucky most of my time writing comics to have worked with very good editors. I don't really have any horror stories the way a lot of writers do. And Lion Forge really was at the high end of that. Andrea and Grace, who we worked with, and Grace, who we're continuing to work with in the second book, did exactly what editors should do, which is they find the places where we get so wrapped up in our own heads for a story that we forget sometimes that we're not letting enough of a window in on the world sometimes, and they do a really good job of helping us level up the story. And I've made it before. Whenever, and this is universally true, doesn't matter if I'm doing prose or comics, that first time I get the editorial comments, I get them and I read them and I say, well, I have just prepared for you the great American novel. Why would you waste my time? And I slam the laptop and I storm away. How dare you in any way choose to diminish what has been a perfect script? And then, but I never write right back. And then the next day, I open it back up and I look at it and I go, oh yeah, okay, no, okay, that makes sense. Oh yeah, oh okay, I can see what you mean there. And then of course at the end I realize they're right, almost everything, and go through. And obviously we have disagreements, and sometimes we'll dig our heels in and say, no, we want it this way. But by and large, I think we were very lucky to have an editorial team that really leveled up the book for us.
That's great.
Yeah, I have to say, Andrea Colvin, who was at Lion Forge at the time, really championed our book. She loved the concept, the whole development of it, not just like story one, but the idea of this larger world. And we had, so Andrea, and then Grace was assisting her, and now Grace is our main editor over at Oni. And both of them love this book. So that's valuable when your editor really is into it and cares about it. And like Andrea, still loves the book and wishes it well, even though she's not working on it anymore. And Grace loves the book and is excited over parts of it that come to her fresh when we send her the new stuff, like the art or the writing. She gets excited with us, which is fantastic. And I'll say, like, I am really, really nitpicky about my own grammar, spelling, etc., to the point where I will correct things in the script that nobody will ever see but us. Like, even if it's like draft 4 of the script and I'm like, oops, let's correct that spelling, because one day this will be in the back of a trade collection and you don't want it to be spelled wrong. But I'm really picky about that stuff. So what I need is someone to do what Ben was saying, which is to be like, but logically, this connection in your brain, but you've missed it on the page. We need to know that. The reader needs to know that. It's great that they, like, I don't catch everything, so you always need more pairs of eyes. But the main thing that we have benefited from is having editors who go to the, bigger picture. How does it all play out? And it's really fun to have those conversations too. Like, we recently had one, I won't spoil everything, but it was a discussion about how some hamsters were moving and looking. And there was a question as to, is this something we really need to do at this point and everything like that. And then there was like, well, but here's why in the next thing it might make sense. And then our editor was like, oh, that's really cool. Okay, I didn't think about that. And like, we have these conversations, and that's really valuable because it feels like a team, someone else who's on your team, not just someone who gets your thing and goes, here's the things you need to change. Someone who really cares about the books.
And that's important. That's the thing with comics that I really love about it, is the teamwork. That when you're reading this thing, it's all of these creative people all kind of meshing together to get this really cool story out.
Yeah, and it's,
and we should mention Tom Zoller, who is the letterer of the book, who also does great work, and Michelle. You would want to mention your partner.
Yeah, so my spouse Adrian Ricker is also an illustrator, and bless his heart, he did the flat coloring for me for the first book and is now currently working on the flats for the second book. And that's basically, if anyone doesn't know, just kind of thinking of it as a coloring page and just blocking in colors. So I get to go in and do all the fun stuff like the effects. And that's one of my favorite parts of making a comic. So him and our maps creator Eric, and
Yes.
again, I cannot sing praises enough to our editor Grace. She is incredible and she keeps me sane. And then everyone who works outside of that, you know, in the publisher, the marketing team, the production team, like it is a humongous team effort to make a book. So while you're seeing the three of us talk about it now, it never would have happened without, you know, the dozens of people who helped us get here.
And speaking of that team, between Michelle and that production team, the covers of that first book and the second book is every bit as good, are just so good. They just did such a good job on this cover.
I wish we could show the second cover, but
the second
we'll have to
cover
wait.
is not yet shown, but it is done and it's gorgeous. And yeah, so Eric Orchard is the artist who does our maps, and we talked at some point about like, oh, do we want to have some people doing like little like, you know, pinups of how they see our characters, and we decided for the first book at least and going forward, it's nice to have the cohesion of Michelle's art throughout the entire book. So Eric's art is Eric's two maps in the first book are the only place you don't see Michelle's art, but because they're maps and they're done in this watercolor style that's different, it actually like goes with the idea of it being, you know, this story in the way that we like to see it laid out. So Eric's maps are great. And then, as I said, like Tom comes in and he does the lettering. He has to place the word balloons and then figure out all that stuff and do all the most of the effects if Michelle's done a few like drawn in, but then there's other ones that he does. So he really adds to it as well. And so it's a huge team effort, and the marketing people and PR people have been supportive and are excited about it. And, you know, we should mention the activity book that is free for anyone who's still trying to entertain their children during the pandemic that is still going on. There's an activity book that Michelle put together a large chunk of, where you can color hamsters and find things in pictures and write little story things about the hamsters. And then Ben did a write your own adventure. And I did a thing that I think is coming out, a little science project that I think is going to show up shortly. But you can find most of the activity book for free online, and hopefully we can put up a link to that.
Oh, well, we will. We'll have links. I want to congratulate the entire team, the entire group that did Underfoot, because it's wonderful, and we're pretty much out of time. I want to thank you guys for taking time to join us from Portland and where, Ohio, are you?
Yeah.
And the magic of the internet. And I want to let everyone know, take a read for this. It's really good. And you guys let me know when Underfoot 2 comes out so I can get that.
We can tell you it is slated for April of 2021. So stay tuned. The Underfoot Into the Sun is book 2, and it's coming out hopefully in April 2021.
Well, remind me, Emily, because by that time I'll forget because I'm old.
Will do.
And I want to let people know, please remember to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you know when we have new stuff coming up, and you can comment down below. And in the comments, we will put links to these people's social media presence, Patreons if they got it, websites, all that kind of stuff, where you can get the Underfoot, and a link to the activity book too, because that sounds really cool. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
From everyone at Fast Forward, this is Mike Zipser saying, take care, wash your hands, stay home, wear your goddamn masks.
Yes.
Bye-bye.